Okay, so this is insane. Donovan Mitchell has been traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I really love this move for Cleveland. This one pretty much came out of nowhere. A lot of people were watching the New York Knicks even after the RJ Barrett extension and expecting them to be the ones who eventually ended up with Donovan Mitchell. That is not the case. The Cavaliers swoop in here. There was a few rumors about Cleveland, not very many. But we did have some sort of inkling that something might be going down after yesterday. He changed his Twitter bio, Donovan Mitchell did, to remove the Utah Jazz from his bio. So we figured something might be going down today, and indeed it did. We have Mitchell to the Cavaliers for Lauri Markkanen, Ochai Agbaji, Colin Sexton on a sign and trade deal. He signed a 4-year, $72 million contract to go to the Utah Jazz, as well as 3 unprotected first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. Those 3 unprotected first-round picks are in 2025, 2027, and 2029. So a ways out, there's always the possibility that Mitchell leaves Cleveland or they somehow fall apart through free agency or trades or otherwise or injury. But regardless, I don't think this is a huge risk by the Cavaliers because they are going to be a very good basketball team probably for the rest of this decade. They have, in my opinion, what is arguably the best young core in the entire NBA. When this deal went down, I was fully expecting to see Jarrett Allen's name involved if it wasn't going to be Darius Garland or Evan Mobley, because I figured those two were going to be off the table, rightfully so. And so I figured it might be Jarrett Allen going back to the Utah Jazz, but instead it is just the poo-poo platter of Lauri Markkanen, Ochai Agbaji, who I think is a pretty good prospect, and then the sign and trade for Colin Sexton, who probably wasn't in the Cavaliers' future plans anyway. I think this is a massive win for the Cavs to keep their young core together and add Donovan Mitchell to it. He's 25 years old, has been a perennial all-star for his entire career, and is going to continue to be good. He's on a long-term contract signed for like 3-4 more seasons at the very least. And then we have Darius Garland, who just signed a contract extension on his rookie deal. He's only, like 21, 22 years old. Evan Mobley is, like 19 or 20. These guys are really, really good, and they're really, really young, and they're just going to continue to get better and better. If this team is not already a contender in the East, I think they absolutely will be within 2 to 3 seasons. I'm very high on Darius Garland. I'm very high on Evan Mobley. I think Mobley's going to be a perennial all-star, potentially starting as soon as this season. He's going to win multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards. This dude is the real deal. I watched him play in college, and he has just improved so much, even in that 1 year between USC and the Cavaliers. He just made so much improvements to his offensive and defensive game. He really anchors the Cavaliers. He fits well with what they do. He's a super smart player, and I think he's going to be really, really good as he continues to get older and develop. And Darius Garland made a big leap this past season as well. I believe he was in the All-Star game, if I'm not remembering that incorrectly. The dude is just a flat-out bucket. He's an incredible passer. He's just a super smart player as well. Him and Mobley both are really good on the mental side of the game, and I think that's really going to help them when they add Mitchell into this core, along with Jarrett Allen and Kevin Love and all these other guys that they have. The Cavaliers are going to be smart. They're going to be long. They're going to be good defensively, even with Mitchell and Darius Garland being both a little bit undersized in the backcourt. I think they more than make up for that with their size in the front court with Mobley and Allen together. I think this team is probably a top 4 contender in the Eastern Conference. There's a lot of really good teams in the East. Obviously, the Celtics just made the finals. The Milwaukee Bucks will absolutely be back. The Miami Heat will be back as well. The 76ers now. Joel Embiid could potentially win the MVP this year. You can throw the Brooklyn Nets back in there, even with all the turmoil that they've been through now that we know KD is coming back. I think the Cavs are in that group. Now, that's a lot of good teams. I think that's 6 teams that I just named off, but they should absolutely be a playoff lock. I think they're going to be above the play-in, and they're probably going to end up being better than 1 or 2 of those teams that I just mentioned, which would be a big accomplishment, but I think it's definitely possible. And I think that, maybe a year or 2 from now, we're going to be looking at this Cavaliers team as a bona fide title contender. They have all these guys signed long-term. They're not going to have to worry about contracts for the time being. Everybody can just focus on getting better and playing together. And, I think the sky's the limit for Garland and Mobley, like I've talked about. Mitchell is already super good, so is Jarrett Allen. This team has, like I've already said, in my opinion, probably the best, if not one of the top 3 or 2 best young cores in the NBA. and I think it would probably be a disappointment if they did not at least make a finals with this team as currently constructed. They can maybe use a move or two around the edges to really make this better. They don't have a ton of depth right now, but this team is going to be super, super good, and I do not mind them taking this risk at all. A lot of people are going to say, oh, it's too risky to give up these unprotected first-round picks when you don't know if these guys are even going to be on the team in a couple of years. This is absolutely a risk worth taking. Like I said, I like the first-round picks. I like Ochai Agbaji as a prospect. Colin Sexton is fine. Larry Markkanen's fine. But this platter that they gave up for Donovan Mitchell is not as much as I thought they were going to have to give up, and I think it's a massive win for them to get him on the price that they did. Now let's pivot over to the Utah Jazz. On the flip side of that coin, right, I think that the Cavaliers got a hell of a deal getting Mitchell for this price. I think the Jazz probably could have gotten a little bit more. I think that Danny Ainge looked at this and saw the 3 unprotected picks, which was more than what anybody else was offering him, and decided to pull the trigger on this trade. I don't think he's necessarily crazy for doing that because, like I said, we don't even know if Mitchell's going to be on Cleveland by the time these picks are heading over. He's going to be at the end of his contract, and if things don't go well or if he doesn't like the city, maybe he does end up wanting to go to the New York Knicks. I guess we'll see. But yeah, if Mitchell's not on this team by the time these picks come due, then they could definitely end up being okay. But even without Mitchell, you keep Evan Mobley, you keep Darius Garland, this team is still going to be pretty good, even in 2029. So I feel like, these picks are not as valuable as perhaps a New York Knicks unprotected picks would have been. And these pick swaps, I know people are going to look at it as 5 first-round picks. The swaps don't matter to me. I think for the duration of the rest of this decade, most likely the Cavs are going to have a better record than the Jazz, and they're going to be picking lower anyway. So these picks, I just don't really care about them. The swaps, I mean. And there was a time in my life when I was really high on Colin Sexton as a prospect. I really liked him his first couple of years in the league. But coming off the ACL tear and stuff, it just concerns me a little bit, that's all. He's getting older. I feel like he's a little bit of a shot chucker. I kind of have a similar criticism of Mitchell, if I'm being honest with you. But I think that Colin Sexton... I'm not sure how much he contributes to real winning basketball. I think he just shoots a little bit too much and is not necessarily the smartest player. So that's my criticism of him. And getting him on 4 years, $72 million, I don't really care about the number. The Jazz have to pay somebody, right? They traded away all of their stars, and I assume they're going to trade away a lot of their other veterans as well. You have to be paying somebody, and this contract is by far, far from untradeable. So I assume that Sexton will end up putting up a lot of numbers on a pretty bad Jazz team this year, and if he ends up looking good and he doesn't really fit the timeline of their rebuild, which honestly he probably won't because I think the Jazz are going to be pretty bad for a while, they could end up dealing him somewhere else, and I don't think it would be the end of the world. And then Ochai Agbaji, I mentioned I'm high on him as a prospect. I liked the fact that the Cavs got him at the end of the lottery. I believe he is an older rookie, and so him fitting, what the Jazz are trying to do, who knows, right? He's a little bit more polished, maybe not as raw. Maybe he can have a higher ceiling right away. So we'll see what he can do for the Jazz this year. We don't really know what he's going to look like in the NBA, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up playing a pretty good role for them and ends up boosting up his value as the year goes along. And then Larry Markkanen, I don't really care about him as a player. He's really just here for salary filler. I think he's fine. He can play a role on a pretty good team. And he's going to be, like I said with Sexton, he's going to be able to put up some pretty big numbers on a pretty bad Jazz team this year. I think he's absolutely tradable. I don't see him as part of the Jazz future plans, even if they said so today. I assume that he's going to get dealt at some point during the life of the contract that he signed back with the Cavaliers a couple of years ago. And, he's kind of just here to make the money work. Like I said, he's a fine player. He can be pretty good for you, but it's not really moving the needle for me in terms of the Jazz compensation that they got. And then the other thing that this signifies is the Jazz, if we didn't know this already, we can now basically 100% confirm that the Jazz are going into a complete and total rebuild this season. They got a lot of picks for Gobert. They're getting a bunch of picks now for this Donovan Mitchell trade. And they still have a bunch of veterans on the roster that can get them a couple of seconds, maybe a first out of a couple of these guys. Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, Bojan Bogdanovic. You have Jared Vanderbilt that you just got, Malik Beasley. You can, like I said, potentially trade Larry Markkanen, Rudy Gay even, who is on the roster. The Jazz are not done dealing. We know this. Ever since they hired Danny Ainge, it was going to be a lot of trades coming to the Jazz, and that has taken place over the past couple of months here. They're going to continue to make some trades. This team is going to be really, really bad for the next couple of years, and if they're lucky, they can potentially land a guy like Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, any of the guys in this upcoming draft, and then there's going to be a lot of young players coming into the NBA over the next couple of years that can really help the Jazz out. They're going to be drafting at the top of the lottery, probably for the next 5 to 6 seasons before they can really start thinking about being good again. I know that's kind of a pessimistic outlook, but rebuilds take a long time in the NBA. The Jazz do have a lot of picks. They could potentially expedite this rebuild by packaging some picks together and trading for more established players once they have their franchise cornerstone. But the most important thing right now is finding the guy who they think is going to be the future of the franchise, and that involves being really, really bad this year.